What all goes into a vaccine being FDA approved?
Sure. Well, it's a long, laborious process. But I think when you talk about a vaccine being approved or a medication being approved from the Food and Drug Administration, you have to go back in a vaccine and look at where it starts. And it starts with having a virus or a bacteria that is infecting people, making them sick, and that there becomes a need to create that vaccine. So vaccines are created starting out in a lab. The virus or the bacteria, in this case SARS-CoV-2, we're talking about the virus that's wreaking havoc on us now and causing a pandemic. That in a lab started with reverse engineering to how do we create a mimic of that virus to put into the body that tells our body to recognize SARS-CoV-2 virus and create antibodies to fight that virus. So vaccines are intended to fight viruses by they tell our bodies to get a jump start. They prepare our immune system. So then when we do come in contact with the virus, that our bodies say, I recognize that, I'm going to go after it and shut it down before it becomes full-blown infection and we have illness and disease. So in that lab, the first and foremost priority is safety. So they look at safety. That starts, or once they have a product that they believe can work, a vaccine, then it starts to look at safety. And when we go through what are called clinical trials, there are phases to that. So the phase 1 is safety. It's generally tested in animals first. Now, as we have continued to evolve in a very technology-driven world, there's less and less of that and more computer algorithm and computer-based testing to be able to analyze safety profiles and how it would respond within the body. So then we jump to, everything passes that, then we jump to phase 2. Phase 2 is a small trial, human trial, where we start to look at efficacy and safety. Maybe less than 100 people, and these are volunteers that sign up for this. And then we move past that into phase 3. Phase 3 are where you really, absent COVID, because we knew about every step with it being the most scrutinized vaccine that we've ever seen. But in the normal traditional world, you don't hear about a drug or a vaccine coming to market until really phase 3. And then we start looking at numbers of individuals in the few thousands. I found it very interesting as I was doing a little bit of looking in that the typical clinical trial has about 2,000 people enrolled in it. When you look at the Pfizer, now Comirnaty, because it has been approved trial, it started with 44,000 individuals that were enrolled in that phase 3 trial. Wow. So they had two sides. It's called randomized controlled study, had 22,000 individuals who received the vaccine that is now approved, and 22,000 individuals who received placebo. And so those sides are compared, and the bias is removed because these are randomized controlled studies. A lot of times the scientists running the studies don't even know who the control group is and who the actual is getting the vaccine group is. That's known at a level that's one step removed from the actual administration, so it removes the bias from that. So it started there, and then totally unique to this situation is emergency use authorization, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and then millions of doses being given. The FDA didn't just stop and say, hey, we did our job, we gave emergency use approval. They continued to evaluate that. So we're now north of 200 million doses that played into the approval process. The other piece that kind of goes into that is you look at how this could happen so quickly when it takes years for this to accomplish outside of this. And I think the crucial element that we talk about there is resources and effort.
Right.
So this is a worldwide pandemic that literally the world was on standstill for a vaccine. There's nothing more important in the last 18 months than ending the pandemic.
Right.
So financial resources, scientist resources, the minds that are going into this, technology resources is unlimited.
Well, and that kind of goes into, I've talked to people who are like, when they compare it to the flu vaccine, and they're like, well, the flu vaccine has been, it's been around for a really, really long time. We just know so much more about that compared to COVID. And I always kind of think of whenever it was, created. A long time ago, they didn't have the documentation and the communication technology that we have today to get it to other researchers across the world and stuff like that. So it really was a worldwide combined effort compared to a lot more limited capabilities back in those days.
Right. And the flu vaccine is always an interesting comparison because, influenza and coronavirus have had their comparisons. And so that drew to the vaccine comparisons. Interestingly, though, and outside of the medical world, I don't know that everybody's as aware of this, but every year, scientists make an educated guess on what the emerging influenza virus strains will be. And the vaccine is then formulated to those strains. So in less than a year's time, every single year, we create an influenza vaccine.
Right. So it's a new vaccine.
It's a new vaccine. Now, there are constants in the inactive ingredients, just as there are in this. And these inactive ingredients in the coronavirus vaccines were used in many other vaccines. Now, the new technology makes people pause, but then you look at the mRNA technology and step back from a science world and say it's got decades of experience in targeted cell therapy for cancer patients. It's not new. It's new to vaccines. And mRNA vaccines that failed prior, which has drawn some criticism, they didn't fail because they were unsafe. They didn't fail because they shouldn't be given to humans for one reason or other concern. They failed because funding wasn't there or because they didn't show efficacy.
Right.
So in the case of this, as we talked about, funding was unlimited and the efficacy has proven to be greater than many vaccines. So then you proceed forward and it puts us where we're at today, where we now have an FDA approved vaccine that has shown efficacy, safety, and really, starts to move us forward in this pandemic.
This was a clip of the Good Samaritan Healthcast. If you want to hear more of what you just heard, just head on over to gshvin.org/healthcast.